Thank you all for coming tonight. I am Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's great to have so many of you here with us in the museum and on Zoom. As we gather today, we are all on indigenous lands. For those of you joining us from home, I encourage you to learn more about the indigenous presence in your area, both past and present. Those of us at the museum are on Indakina, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. We are grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we've put some links in the chat where you can learn more about the indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abenaki peoples of Northern New England through the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective and the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec. I'm delighted tonight to have Brian Fowler join us. It has been my pleasure to get to know him over this last year as I developed the idea for this exhibition. In his role as the president of the Old Man of the Mountain Legacy Fund, he's been a great support of building what I know will be a lasting partnership between the museum and the Legacy Fund. And tonight we'll all benefit from his over 25 years of study of the stability of the old man. And our event tonight is made possible with support of New Hampshire Humanities in partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities. And you can learn more about them at www.nhhumanities.org.
Thanks, Megan, for the intro. And I'm going to talk about the Old Man of the Mountain, and you all know what that's all about. Or maybe you think you know, but when we get done tonight, you'll have a different idea of what's going on with him. This is a geologic history of the old man, but the geologic history of the old man is really a human history also. Yeah, and so you're going to get a mix of some geotechnology and some human history and all of that sort of thing. I like to do this informally, so if you think of a question as I'm going along, just stick your hand in the air. And I know the folks in the chat can do that through the chat. So I like to have this as interactive as we can be. The old man belonged to everybody in the state of New Hampshire, and as a lot of you know, a lot of people who were outside New Hampshire. So feel free to participate here in whatever way you want. I have to tell you, this is the first time I've done this virtually. So if I seem a little tentative here and there, I apologize. Anyway, we on May 3rd, 2003, we lost the Old Man of the Mountain. And as you'll see, it was a process that Mother Nature had started probably somewhere in the ballpark of 500 to 1,000 years ago and finished on May 3rd, 2003. This is the 20th anniversary of the collapse of the Old Man, and some of you may have heard about these various events we've been doing. We had an event on May 3rd, which was virtual, because in examining the weather records for the last 20 May 3rds since 2003, we found there were only 2 of them when you could legitimately have an outdoor event up in Franconia Notch. Snow, rain, sleet, the usual raft of stuff. So we did that one virtually, and then just last week, a week ago today, actually, we had an outdoor event, family, so-called family event, up at the plaza, which you'll see in the show here tonight. We had about 600 people come through, and it was a scavenger hunt, which all the families really got into. We were sort of amazed by that, and we're still coming off the glow from all of that. Anyway, we have been trying to find a way to remember the old man ever since he came down. And tonight's program is one way to do that. The Legacy Fund that I'm the president of at the moment is trying to take that legacy forward from here, as you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. Anyway, on May 3rd, 2003, which is, this is the view that we were all confronted with when we got there. And there was almost like a major personality had passed away, or a very close relative. Lots of expressions of mourning, if you will, tears, all sorts of things. There was a broad range, but it left us with the idea that we needed to do something. We couldn't just walk away from this event. So I thought tonight I'd start off by giving you an idea of how the old man formed. It's a fairly simple process, but it has some steps and some pieces to it that are important to understand. The story begins with the last glacier, the last glaciation, which is diagrammatically shown here. Here's, get my, whoops. There we go. We're down here, near the edge of this Cape Cod right there. We had glacial ice burying New Hampshire, probably on the order of a mile thick. A very significant amount of ice. And during that time, the Cannon Mountain, where the old man was located, was buried under this ice mass. And the ice mass was moving constantly and scraping over the surface of the earth. And this is a map of New Hampshire here to show you the elevations. And you can see the ice was coming from the northwest, from upper level, or the upper left corner here, down towards the right. And it had a pretty easy go until it got to the mountain front here in the White Mountains. And when it got here, the ice had to funnel its way through the mountains. And what it did, as the glacial ice was approaching, it was find the deepest pre-existing stream valleys or other declivities in the mountains, and it would funnel itself down into those first. And as the ice built up in depth, it gradually buried the whole place. But those deeper valleys were the sites where most of the heavy glacial erosion had taken place. This is Franconia Notch taken from the helicopter. And you can see this nice U shape here in the notch. The old man was around the corner there. This is Cannon Mountain on the right. But you can see this nice U-shaped notch here. That's the classic erosional pattern for this kind of deep glacial ice erosion. This is a view of Cannon Cliff today. You can see that U shape right up there in the notch. Yeah, I get my little pointer to work right here. There we are. And at the time, it was coming down through here. The Cannon Cliff that you see in the slide here probably wasn't there. The mountainside was just scoured off by the glacial ice. And as the glacial period came to an end, the current thinking is that the ice in the White Mountains didn't retreat the way you may have heard it retreating elsewhere, but it down melted here in among the mountains. So the mountain peaks began to peak out from the ice as it down melted. And you could sort of imagine maybe this little slot here might be Franconia Notch, just to give you a feel for it. Anyway, this melting process continued until the ice basically had melted away, and most of the major glacial ice was off to the north. This is not New Hampshire. This is just a slide to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. When the glacial ice was about 5 to 10 miles north of Franconia Notch, which is roughly speaking between 11 and 12,000 years ago, the Cannon Cliff, which we see today, didn't exist, but two really important processes began to attack the granite that was there. The vegetation wasn't there yet, still too cold, no soil and so forth. So we had a nice bald rock surface here, eroded off in a dome, as you can see here, plus the glacial notch in front of it. So you had the makings for the establishment of a cliff right on hand. The first process has to do with the granite that made up the old man. It's the Conway granite, which is named after the first place it was studied over in Conway, New Hampshire. And it's a biotite granite, sort of standard stuff, medium to coarsely grained, but it has a characteristic that it weathers very quickly. Chemical weathering attacks it very efficiently. The potash feldspar, which is the major mineral component of the granite, it suffers from this process of weathering, which is generated by water. And of course, as the glacial ice is melting away, there's plenty of meltwater and causing it to fall apart. So you can see in this slide here, you can see all this sort of gravelly looking stuff. And here's a boulder that's proceeding to fall apart, basically as I was taking the picture. This is a photomicrograph of the granite. What we do with the geology is we take a slice of the granite, very, very thinly sliced, and we smooth it off. and put it under a microscope and shine different kinds of light through it so we can identify the minerals. And you can see the QTZ is quartz here, lots of quartz. We've got some potash feldspar. K is the chemical symbol for potassium. This is one of the potassium crystals here. You're looking at something here that's probably the size of the head of a pin or a little bit bigger. So it's blown up, obviously, so you can see it. But when this potash feldspar weathers out of the granite, it basically causes the rest of the granite structure to fall apart, as you saw on that slide just a minute ago. Now, the other thing about the Conway granite is these fractures that you see here with the arrows. This particular slide was taken from a sample that we retrieved about 75 feet beneath the surface in fresh Conway granite. We were surprised to see these fractures here. And so we put a different kind of light through the same slide. And here's what it looks like with that different light. And here, 75 feet beneath the surface, we've already got rusty accumulations forming along most of these fractures. Meaning to say that this granite body, when it was cooling, didn't have a nice gentle cooling process. It probably cooled in stages, fast and slow and fast and slow. And the granite body itself was under some stress as it was cooling, probably differential heat, making certain sections of it move differentially. So the Conway granite is pre-fractured, if you will. And so when you get the minerals falling apart, this is where that potash crystal was right up here. And you can see the rusty stuff forming along the edge of it. This is probably a section right here that's already weathered, similar to what you saw on the earlier slide. So those two processes are tearing this granite apart. When you combine that with another very significant process here called frost wedging, you've got the ingredients for tearing this mountain apart pretty quickly. And the freezing and thawing, for those, you probably sort of know this intuitively, but freezing and thawing in rock is a pretty straightforward process. You can see in slide A on the left here, we've got a little crack in the rock and some water goes down in the crack. If it goes below freezing that night, that water freezes. And when it does, it wedges that crack a little bit. Next day, that water melts, but the crack is a little deeper. So the water that day goes a little further into the crack. And gradually, day after day after day, you can actually take a pretty sound piece of rock and break it apart. And that process is very efficient on the Cannon Cliff and has created, let's see, I got this enormous talus slope below. I think everybody in the room here is probably driven by the Cannon Cliff at one time or another and has seen the extensive talus slope at the bottom here. This is where the old man was up here. This is his debris down here in the talus slope. In 1997, there was another rock slide, another rock fall up here, which slid down, and you can see its debris down here in below. When you drive past the Cannon Cliff, you can tell where the most recent rock slides have occurred by looking at the color of the rock on the talus slope. The older slides are grayish, like you see here, and the newer slides, exclusive of the vegetation, are lighter colored, which is more like the native color of the granite itself. So between the chemical degradation, chemical weathering of the granite, and this freezing and thawing process, we had a very, very active, dynamic kind of bunch of activity going on the cliff. So the old man formed, and this is a nice picture of him here, from 5 major sections of slabs. They're not uniform slabs like a countertop, but they're components of slabs. There's the chin and the upper lip, and the nose slab here, the eyebrow, and then the forehead on top here. You get a chance to look at these in a little different perspective here in a minute. The old man's, the legacy of the old man starts really in the late 19th century, when various people had seen the old man's profile. Those of you who know the literature probably have heard The Great Stone Face by Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1830. And along in that section, people began to see this profile and they were stunned by it. It's utterly human form, really drove people to write in poetry and literature, paintings, and some of that's upstairs when you have a chance after we get through here. If it's still open when we get through, you should have a look. The impact of the old man is, and this is geology I'm talking about tonight, but the impact of the old man is much broader than just what I'm talking about. And anyway, in the good old New Hampshire fashion, the profile house was built up there in Franconia Notch State Park in what is now the parking lot for the tramway, for those of you who are familiar with it. And the owners of the profile house, the 680 rooms, people, this is back in the age when people would come up with a trunk full of stuff and spend the summer here. And the owners knew that and encouraged people to come to seek inspiration from residing for the summer near the old man. And but he realized pretty quickly that this thing was fragile. He hiked up there and looked around and thought, gee, you know, if this thing goes away, I'm up the creek. So he, in the early part of the 20th century, got a hold of this fellow here, Edward Geddes, who was a quarry superintendent down in Quincy, Massachusetts, in the Quincy quarries. Those of you who are familiar with Boston will know all about Quincy granite. And he came up and took a look and said, yeah, I think I can help you. And he proceeded to come up the next summer. And with a 3 to 5 pound sledgehammer and a star drill, installed a series of tie rods on various boulders on top of the old man, which he believed if they rolled or changed their position on top of the old man would upset the balance and would cause it to collapse. And you couldn't pay anybody enough to do this kind of thing today. And plus OSHA would never let you up there to do it anyway. A lot of his tie rods survived. So some of them survived the collapse, as you'll see when we get to that part of the show here. Anyway, in fact, I got a shot here. You can see those right there. There's a steel rod, and there's another one right there. Those are the two that he installed in the forehead block. Obviously, he was concerned that this block would hit, would leave the profile and go to the valley. But he also put tie rods on a number of these other blocks on the surface that he thought might roll and upset the balance. Anyway, the process of taking care of the old man advanced slowly over the years. This fellow here is Niels Nielsen, who some of you may know or know of him. He's passed away now. His son David has sort of taken over for him as the titular caretaker of the old man. But Niels worked for the Bridge Maintenance Division of the New Hampshire Highway Department, which specialized in lowering themselves over the side of bridges with bosun's chairs and cables and one thing or another. And he thought, well, heck, it's not too different from repairing a bridge, so we'll go have a look. And I'm relaying a story his son has told me, so I'm not making this up. Anyway, so he went up and he and his crew spent many years taking care of the old man each year. What they would do is come up here, and by the way, there's one of those tie rods that Mr. Geddes had installed. This picture is taken in the 1970s. Anyway, they would come up and they had points of measurement on the profile that they would look at each year, see if there was any change in the relationship between the blocks on the cliff. And then they would go along the sides of the profile here and install epoxy seals, which were intended to keep moisture from being driven into the cracks in the rock by the wind. Up here, it's very windy, especially in the summertime when it's warm and humid. The rock is cold, the air is warm and humid, and that rock, the warm, humid air hits the rock, condenses, and then the wind, the air pressure basically forces the water into the cracks. And as you saw from earlier slides, all you need is water and freezing and thawing, and you've got the very ingredients that can cause this thing to fail. Anyway, they would sit in this little wooden bosun's chair, which I think the chair itself is upstairs if you want to see it. This is a remarkably courageous, bordering on maybe another word, thing that what one would do. as you see in a little while, we were up there, and I'll get to that in a minute, never mind. Anyway, he and his crew would be there. He was all attached up here with cables and winches, and he would go down and spread the epoxy and make the measurements all the way around the entire profile. There began to be some concern about the interstate highway system along about the mid-1960s. Interstate 93 had come north and was approaching, probably Thornton at that time, with obviously aimed right at Lincoln and Franconia. And I-93 was coming down from St. Johnsbury, also with its sights on Franconia Notch. And it looked as though that was inevitably going to be where the highway would go. And this picture is in the early 1970s. This is old Route 3. And those of you who had seen the old man back in those days probably stood on the shore of Profile Lake looking up at the profile from down there. But in 1958-ish, two things happened. The first one was that money was appropriated by the New Hampshire legislature to install these turnbuckles. And the idea was that the forehead slab was two pieces, one forward and one back. And the idea was to attach the forehead slab out in the front to the one in the back. Idea being that by tightening the turnbuckles, they could keep the forehead together and prevent what would obviously be a nasty situation. And at the same time, so these turnbuckles were installed by a crew from Scranton, Pennsylvania, from the coal mines. These guys were up there with 350-pound jackhammers with 3/4-inch manila ropes tied around their waists. And once again, today you would never see an operation like that anywhere. But they did install these turnbuckles. This component of the turnbuckle is known as a staple. Okay, and the staple has you drill two holes, one for each foot, or one for each foot on the staple. You can sort of see the 2 feet there. And the feet, the actual depth of the feet is about 3 feet. So this is the staples put into a 3-foot or 2 3-foot holes with cement around them, and that sets up so that the staple is secure. A little later on, you'll see the staples after the collapse, and you'll see how they worked. Anyway, so the turnbuckles were installed with the idea of keeping these two pieces together. This epoxy roof, was created with some concrete blocks, and then a basically wire mesh roof was installed, and the epoxy was applied to the top of it. Idea being that it would keep water from going down into the crack in the forehead slab that was of concern. The turnbuckles were tightened up, and everybody felt fairly good. I think I wasn't there for this part. But in 1965, when it was pretty clear the interstate, the two aiming processes were focused on Franconia Notch, they thought, well, we ought to take a preliminary look at this whole thing, check this out, and see what kind of vibrations are reaching the old man at that time. So the U.S. Geological Survey came up here and installed a seismograph right in back of where this photograph was taken, and they began to record the seismic vibrations that were affecting the rock mass 24/7 for one summer. And they found that there were 3 sources of vibration that they could pick up on the instruments. The first one was from the wind, gusty wind, and they were able to relate that to wind and weather observation equipment that they had nearby. That was the first source of dynamic vibration in the rock mass. The second source was thunderstorms, which sort of obvious, crashing thunder or whatever. And the third one was sonic booms, which they could pick up and relate to FAA records of jets flying around and so forth. And we don't do sonic booms anymore, but they were pretty powerful, some of them in the early days. There was no evidence in those days of vibration related to traffic on the highway down below, or to hikers or other kinds of vibrations that you might think of. But for those of you who are familiar with seismic work, the seismograms, have, you get a vibration and up it goes and it goes back to normal and so forth. But most of the time in geophysical seismographs, you've got what they call noise. There's this sort of background noise that's going on all the time. And they couldn't really figure out what that was because this location was isolated such as it was. So on the day that all the officials got together to figure out what this noise was all about, the Cannon Mountain Ski Patrol was commissioned to lead them up there, bring their lunches and all that. And during the packing up and getting up there, the ski patrol forgot their lunches. So they proceeded to go back down to get their lunches while the engineers and geophysicists were eating their lunches, and came back up carrying these wooden blocks with them when they came. And install the wooden blocks under the turnbuckles, as you can see here, and the noise went away. And what was going on was that the wind was blowing across the forehead slab here and vibrating those turnbuckles, just the way the radio antenna on your car would vibrate as you're driving along. It's called the von Karman effect, those of you who may know your physics. Anyway, these wooden blocks damped that vibration, and the noise went away from the seismogram. So that gave us a chance to know for sure that we had the three major sources of vibration to deal with. As you'll see in some pictures later, these blocks survived the collapse also. So they were very, very Yankee kind of development, unsophisticated, but they worked. So let's take a little look at this rock mass. This is the old man everybody saw for years. And what I want you to do is think of yourself sitting in a helicopter. We're going to fly straight up in the air, and then we're going to fly around to the left, sort of in a clockwise fashion. So you get a feel for this rock mass as it was. So we've gone straight up in the air here from the viewpoint. Here's the old man here. You can see the forehead block that was that Geddes had secured out there. And this is the rock mass itself. This is the trail that the rock climbers use to come down from the cliff after they take a rock climb. This is the Pemigewasset Valley and Old Route 3 down there. And you can see the extensive talus slope here. Okay, we'll go around here to the left. And this is the rock mass here. Right there. It doesn't look like an old man anymore, but you can see the 5 components of it. Here's the chin block, the upper lip, the nose, the eyebrow, and then the forehead slab. So we'll go a little further around. Here we are again. Here's the chin. This little dot is I attempted to put that into the slide years ago so people could always go back to the chin block. But the slides are old and the little dots fell off the other slide. So you'll have to follow me along. Anyway, this is the chin right here, chin block, the upper lip, the nose, the eyebrow in there, and the forehead. We're going to go around a little further. You can begin to now get a feel for these blocks and how they're positioned up there on the cliff. Here's the chin again. The actual chin you would see in the profile is that point right there. Sorry. Can I go backwards?
Just use the arrow on the keyboard, it'll be easier.
Oops.
The other way.
There we are. Yeah, the chin, the upper lip, the nose block here, so-called, eyebrow and the forehead. You can begin to see here that the nose, eyebrow, and forehead blocks are the only ones that are still connected to the mountain. The chin block is separated. There's a separation behind the chin block and the upper lip here, which we didn't really understand until we got into this study. And I forgot to mention that this study all took place as a result of the I-93 environmental impact statements that had to be done for the what ultimately turned out to be a parkway through Franconia Notch. These studies were designed to figure out if the old man could survive the construction of the different alternatives, which I'll describe a little more later. Anyway, go a little further around, and this is about as close as the helicopter pilot would go. This is the chin block right here, the upper lip, the nose here, nose block, the eyebrow, and the forehead slab. And this is one of the most important pictures we got of the old man during those investigations because of that little thing right there, which is light shining through the rock mass, between the rock mass and the chin block. So this thing was remarkably unstable. I mean, as you'll see in a minute. So we were commissioned to do this study, and myself and 2 or 3 other engineering types at the highway department got tapped for it. I was out of college about 4 years at this point, and thought I was a real hot ticket until I saw this thing and realized I was up the creek. And we learned a lot, let's put it that way. I get paid to rock climb for a whole summer, which was a fantastic opportunity. My wife was not as happy about it as I was, but anyway, these are views taken on the cliff right near the rock mass. The orange line you see is a climbing rope hanging vertically so that we would have a frame of reference for the pictures. This is the chin block, right? That's the point that you would see for his chin looking up from the pond. It was 27 feet from there up to there, and 18 feet from the front surface here back. Whoops, I did it again. Back to if you projected with your eye this fracture here, and then the line of the chin block this way, if you projected that back into the rock mass someplace, that was 18 feet. So what it meant was the chin block was overhung 80% of its width, which is a stunning condition, which I'll describe in effect in a few minutes. This is the upper lip block above it, and you can see the upper lip block is separated from the cliff by a fracture of its own. It was possible to, and we did, climb into this thing and sort of stand up in it. So it was about 6 or 8 feet tall, not particularly wide. You couldn't put 2 of us in there, but I got in there, and after I realized how unstable this was, I thought that's not a place I really want to go again. Talk about getting crushed. Anyway, this is another view of the same thing. Here's the chin block, the actual chin you'd see, the chin block there, the upper lip block above it here with a crack in the back of this sort of cave, if you will. We thought originally that this rock mass right here, which we affectionately referred to as the Adam's apple, we thought that that was what was supporting all of this, but it fell off 2 years after we finished the work, and the old man didn't come down. So it was pretty clear that was not the mechanism that was holding it up there. But the rock in this area was under great distress, and we lots of fracturing and evidence that it was not happy. This is a view looking straight up at the old man's rock mass. Once again, the bag of rocks is hanging vertically here. This is the chin block that you can see. It goes off the slide over here, probably over to roughly the edge of the screen there. The chin block here, upper lip right above it. Here's the nose block up here. You can't see the eyebrow, but that's the forehead block that Edward Geddes had secured in place. This entire rock mass is cantilevered, or was cantilevered in place. To visualize this, when you get out of here later, you can go home and get 5 books, 5 hardcover books, each about an inch thick, just so they're all about the same. And go to your dining room table and to a corner of the table, sort of like this. Start stacking the books one on top of the other, with each book sticking out a little further than the one below it. And you'll see pretty quickly that you've got to really push with your hand on the back of those books to keep them from toppling forward. And that's the mechanism that was holding the old man up here. His own dead weight down and back into the cliff a little bit, so that he had a pedestal, if you will, to rest upon. And that pedestal is what failed, as you'll see in a minute, when he collapsed. Anyway, in the engineering world, we have what's known as the factor of safety. And what you do is you take all the forces that are going to drive something to fail, in this case, cause the old man to fall off the cliff, And then you divide that by the forces you think are holding it up there. And if the driving forces and the resisting forces are okay, in other words, they're balanced, you get one. You know, you do all the calculations and you come out with one. We never got past 0.85 for this. So I used to tell people, at that time, if you haven't seen the old man, you really need to get there to see it. And it turned out that was unfortunately somewhat prophetic. But anyway, this rock mass, we calculated weighed 7,200 tons. And it was perched there on this block on this bench, which I'll show you in a minute. We think was about the size of half of one of these fold-up tables, about the size of a standard card table. And as long as the compressive strength of the granite, in other words, the ability of the granite to hold a load in compression, as long as that compression strength was maintained, this thing would stay cantilevered in place. As soon as the chemical weathering of the granite and the freezing and thawing deteriorated it enough so it couldn't support that weight anymore, it would fail. And that's where we were in 1976. Now, just to come back to this a little bit, the old man was formed by these processes I described earlier along two major structural features in the granite. One is these sort of sub-horizontal fractures you see. You can see the individual pieces of the profile, and they fractured away. Mother Nature fractured them away along these same surfaces. This is one of these helicopter shots again, and you can see these joints running in the rock mass like this. They're a little closer together near the surface of the rock mass because the weight of the glacial ice had pressed down on the land surface, and when that ice load was relieved, the rock mass dilated. It sort of sprang back, if you will. And but those horizontal joints or sub-horizontal joints were the first component. The second component is the subvertical joints like this that you see all across there. And if you look at the old man here before he collapsed, you can see that the fracturing is along the sub-horizontal joints like that one, and then the vertical joints like this isolated the blocks, which ultimately separated from the cliff. That process had to happen in just the right order, in just the right way, in just the right sequence for the old man to have been created. And a truly remarkable geologic structure. In my 50 years of structural geology, this is without question the most remarkable thing I ever saw. Anyway, this is another helicopter shot looking straight down on the old man, just to give you a feel for what it looked like before it collapsed, and to look at these vertical joints. You can see there's a vertical joint here, another one down in here. This joint comes across and meets up with this one down here. And this one here, you're looking right down on top of it. Down here over in the upper left-hand corner of the slides, probably between the elevation difference between there and here we go again. And the top of the old man's about 900 feet. So you're looking straight down the cliff. And as I say, you can see the influence of these vertical joints. They'll come back into some slides we'll look at a little bit later as well. These are the turnbuckles that were installed. These are the boulders that Mr. Geddes had fastened with the tie rods, and there's his two tie rods in the forehead block. This little thing here was a concrete block. It was installed in 1955 in advance, a couple of weeks in advance of then President Eisenhower's visit to New Hampshire. His chief of staff was Sherman Adams, who was a fixture here in New Hampshire, and thought he should come up here. He couldn't possibly have served as president without a visit to New Hampshire. And the block was installed, or the block had become loose just because of age. So they replaced it so the old man wouldn't appear to have a hole in his head for the purposes of the visit. Anyway, for those of you who are geologists, and for those of you who are not geologists, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but those of you who are, stick around, we can talk about this later. What we did here was to try to integrate a bunch of different techniques to figure out what was the mechanism that was holding up the old man. And we, to make a long story short, we stumbled upon a technique that the Swiss had used in driving the Simplon tunnel from Switzerland into Italy. And what they had done is to do a structural geologic survey like we had done, plot up the poles to the planes of the joint sections, and then to find after you've done the stereographic projection on a flat piece of paper, to find a place that's common to the greatest number of those polar circles. And when you do that, you find what's the optimum direction of strength in the rock mass. So the old man was sitting up there because his dead weight down and back to the cliff was focused right in that little hashed area that you see there on the diagram. For those of you who are into stereographic projections, I'll stick around. We can go at it later. This is a totally invented technique, and it worked in the tunnels in Switzerland and then 2 or 3 other tunnels subsequently. So it has a track record, and it worked here. What it allowed us to do is to see, this is the 7,200 ton rock mass here. And we went down to this little bench, which you can see here is about 4 feet, based on observations up in that cave. And when you look at that in that diagram, it just shows you see the optimum direction is right here. And the dip of the horizontal joints, the ones that we were looking at a minute ago, is right here. So you had the dead weight down and back into the cliff acting in the right direction, almost matching up to the optimum strength direction that we determined from the other diagram. This is obviously a sketch, and the cave is not visible from the old profile, but just so you can relate it to what we're looking at. We knew this was the mechanism now, and now we had to figure out what kind of vibrations that whole structure could survive, influenced by construction primarily, but anything else for that matter. So this was 1976-ish. There were 4 alternatives for the highway, Interstate 93 between Lincoln, which is right down around here, in Franconia. In 1972 or so, the 2 sections of highway had pretty much reached the park boundaries. So there was no doubt it was going through Franconia Notch. There was a 4-lane highway like the interstates you drive all the time. There was a cut and cover tunnel, which some of you probably who live in Boston probably know about cut and cover tunnels. That's the Ted Williams tunnel. They dig a trench, they cut the trench open, put the tunnel structures in the trench and cover it back over. Then there was a driven tunnel, like the tunnels in the Alps. Anyway, we knew the mechanism that was holding it up there, and then we had to look at these different alternatives and decide what kind of vibration each one of them would involve. I won't bore you with all of that because it was a torturous process, but we wound up with a 2-lane parkway, which gratefully, as far as I was concerned, was probably the best we could do, given the fact there was no way the highway wasn't going through the notch in one way or the other. So we came back in 1986. I had left the highway department at that point and had founded a little consulting firm and was happily going on as a consultant and looking at groundwater and other kinds of benign subjects, not the old man. And but when the contracts were let, they figured out who had done this work before, and they said, well, you know, you're a hot ticket, you know all about this, so why don't you design the blasting? And I said, okay, because I needed the money. And we had two kids by then, and but I had a bag packed for Montreal every night I went to work during that summer in case it fell down while I was on the job. Anyway, this is Old Route 3 down below here. We were obviously, this is the old man's rock mass, and we were talking about a straight line distance from the road sites where the blasting would go of about 1,800 feet. And over the ground was about 2,200 feet. So we're not right on top of it, but we're pretty close. So what we did was to protect ourselves basically, and also get ourselves some data as we were designing the blast. We mounted a seismograph right up in that little notch there below the old man's profile. which ran 24/7 for 2 years, except in the winter. We took it out in the winter because the construction was shut down. The reason we put it there was to see if vibrations down in the valley over here being transmitted up along the ground surface would create vibrations at the profile or just below the profile that might be problematic. That summer, those 2 summers, we found the same thing they found in 1965. Wind was the primary source of vibration. Thunderstorms was the second source. By the mid-1980s, the sonic booms were a thing of the past, but now we found the helicopters owned by the contractors who would fly up here with their golf buddies to show them what was going on, would put significant vibrational stresses into the old man. You probably remember the Huey helicopters, and you could hear the whop, 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 and you could see each one of them on the seismograph. So we quickly discouraged the contractors from using their helicopters for tours. Told them to go play golf instead. Anyway, the wind vibrations we were seeing were coming over this shoulder of Cannon Mountain. The northwesterly winds would be to the right-hand side of the slide here, would come up over this rounded shoulder and come right straight down on top of the profile. The southwest winds coming up the notch would be coming towards you in the picture here. They would hit that south face of the old man's profile, that flat face on the south side, and create quite significant vibrations. Anyway, during the course of the construction, we were able to design the blasting, so we had nothing reach the old man that was within 3% of what the natural vibrations were from the wind and the thunderstorms. So if he had come down during the construction, I still would have gone to Montreal, but we would have at least had some evidence that it wasn't our fault. Not that that would have counted for much at that point. Anyway, the thing that came up in the 1986 work that was interesting was we had measured most of these cracks and joints while we were up there in the 1970s, and we had a chance to measure them again. And the rock blocks hadn't moved relative to one another, but the degree of weathering along those joints from the chemical weathering and the freezing and thawing we were talking about earlier had significantly opened and weakened the supporting structure of the old man. The deterioration was pretty stunning. I was not familiar with granite weathering that fast, but it was, and it gave us some concern. But the highway was built, dedicated, champagne bottles broken, and all the good stuff, and everybody went about their business until May 3rd, 2003. When, as best we can tell, and there's an exhibit upstairs, which I'd encourage you to have a look at. It's much simpler than the explanation I'll give you now. But we think that on May 3rd, and there's some question about whether it was really late at night on May 2nd. It's academic at this point, however. The 7,200 ton rock mass that was sitting on that bench basically caused the freezing and thawing caused the bench to collapse, to crumble. And as it did, the chin block and the upper lip, which were uniquely supported there because of the cave, fell forward like that. And as soon as the wedging of those 2 blocks was gone, the rest of it followed quickly, probably all in a matter of seconds. What was left up there, it was a tragic day, believe me. I was amazed at the outpouring that took place. I was sort of into the technical side of it, so wasn't paying that much attention to it. But since I've become well aware of what the legacy of the old man means. But this is what was left up there right after the collapse. You can see, I'll point out some blocks here. You can see this sort of triangular shaped block here, a little curved surface there with a block that seems to fit right into the top of it. A little sort of block there, and then a sort of square block here. We go back to the, whoops. We go forward to the profile, you can see that triangular block right here. A little sort of crescent shaped dish here, if you will, and the block that fits right in it. A little rectangular one here, and there's the square one. So that at that time, see if I can get back here. At the time, we knew that the mass of rock that had fallen off was basically defined, as you can see here, the front of the forehead block failed. The turnbuckles were not able to hold that up there, given the as you'll see in a minute, about 2,000 tons of rock that was falling away, basically ripped the staples right out of the rock. And this is what we were confronted with. And see, the most significant thing from my point of view we saw was all of this stuff here. This is rotten granite, rotted just the same way you saw that boulder earlier in the picture. But this was inside the rock mass of the old man. And this is the old south face out here. And you can see that despite all the epoxy seals and all of the efforts that have been applied to it for years, the moisture had still penetrated inside the old man's rock mass and rotted the granite inside, essentially from the inside out. This was a process we just had not understood how quickly this could go. And a lot of people have asked me, how old do you think the old man was? Well, given the speed with which this goes and how effective it is, it may not have really been that old. It may have been, as I said earlier, 500 to 1,000 years old. Because the processes are so dynamic, it just would be hard to understand how it could have survived much longer than that. Anyway, I mentioned the staples earlier on today, and these are the staples that you can see were pulled out. And part of the reason we know the old man toppled forward is by looking at the staples. The staples are in vertically, and when the old man toppled forward, the staples got pulled out backwards, as you can see. So pretty much proof that the rock mass toppled rather than slid off the mountain, as other rock slides on the Cannon Cliff have done. And of course, the other reason we think it toppled was all of this stuff didn't go with it. There was a residual left on the ledges. So we have a pretty good idea of how he collapsed and why he collapsed.
You think that all that rotten stuff happened before the epoxy on there? They put it epoxy over the rotten mess already.
Yeah, well, it's conceivable. Yeah.
So it's a helicopter that would have taken this angle?
Pardon me?
Would this be a helicopter that would have taken this?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, those of you who may have been here a few weeks ago heard a talk by a young man from Dartmouth who's doing a master's thesis on Cannon Cliff. And I won't repeat all of that again, except to say that he has been able to by 3D imaging of the rock mass on the cliff, he's been able to take archival photographs and match them up geospatially, match them up with the evidence he's got on the cliff itself, and replace the old man's blocks on the cliff. So I used to tell people, well, we know 7,200 tons of rock fell down, and there we are. He's been able to determine that about 2,000 tons actually fell off the rock mass, and another 5,000 still up there. Now, the reason that's important, you'll hear in a few minutes, there's lots of proposals about what to do up there, some of which include putting an old man back up there. And you'll see in a few minutes, the rock mass is not going to take that very well, let's put it that way. And this was a fantastic piece of evidence that we got from his master's thesis. I was asked to perform the autopsy, which you basically have been hearing about here, by the governor at the time, and we did, and we finally now know exactly how much fell off. If you have a chance to look at this, if you go on the Old Man of the Mountain Legacy Fund's website, and I'll give you the link to it later, you can play around with this model yourself. It's a simplified version of it's on the website. But he was able to, you can see the color difference here in this left-hand image. The pieces that are slightly purple are the ones that he replaced from the archival photos, matched up geospatially with the rock that's up there now. And this is a digital elevation model showing you the red is mainly the pieces of the old man that collapsed from the cliff. The lighter colored areas around it, some pieces fell off, but not large ones. And the green is basically the rock that's still up there. Anyway, that's the rundown. Sort of stole my old thunder by telling you about it, but the original estimate was 7,200 tons. The new estimate from the 3D work is about 2,000 tons, or 28% of the original mass. And so there's 5,200 tons left up there, hanging precariously, as you'll see in a minute. This is the rock mass that's left. Not very inspiring from a structural point of view. But there have been numerous proposals. Whoops. This is going the wrong way. There we are. There's been numerous proposals, a lot of them particularly right after the collapse. So we got to get up there and get the old man back up there. The state will not be the same without the old man. And the standing joke was that all the then living governors were in competition to see whose profile would be used as the model for the replacement. Anyway, the autopsy we undertook was also to figure out whether this thing, the rock mass up there, could support anything going forward, whether or not any kind of replacement old man would be put up there. This was a delicate kind of process. This is the back piece of the forehead slab. The front of it's gone here. You can see one of Mr. Geddes, or two of his tie rods. Mr. Geddes' tie rods is still there at that point. In fact, I think they are still there. This is a less than complimentary view of me making measurements between the fixed points of the tie rods, so that we could take aerial photographs of the old man and scale and have some scale, so we could redo the calculations that we had done earlier. This is a helicopter view looking straight down on it. You can see the turnbuckles there, and the old man is obviously missing here. But you can see that the vertical structures in the rock mass here are still present, and they still sorry about that. They still have a significant influence on whether or not this piece of rock in here, this wedge-shaped piece, will stay put. The random boulders on the top are random boulders. It's just sitting there. They're not part of the main rock mass. But if the rock mass below it gives way, all of that would go to the valley. A little bit better view of it. This is what's left of the old man. That's the forehead slab. You can sort of see the turnbuckles there. This major vertical structure here and this one that runs up through the other side create a wedge, which you can see there. And the rock weathering, the chemical weathering of the granite, you can see by the color, is pretty vigorous down here where the two structures come together. This, I'm going to stop that. Down here where these two structures join each other, down here, there's clearly a groundwater accumulation area down here that's causing deterioration in the granite at that level. This is about 250 feet or so below where the old man was originally. Anyway, this is a fairly dry photograph. These joints are very wet. Probably, if you were up there today taking a picture after the last couple of weeks, you'd probably see quite a bit of water. Anyway, a little bit different view. This is Echo Lake down here, and this is the wedge that would appear to be problematic. And as you can see from the first picture in the autopsy here, the rock mass at the top is basically crumbling and not sufficient to support much of anything. A lot of people have said, well, heck, Mount Rushmore, look what they did out there. You could do that here. Well, the difference is that the old man was cantilevered out from the cliff all by himself. In Mount Rushmore, the reason those faces stick out is they took all the granite away from around the faces to make them stick out. And you can see in a rock mass this rotten, we would have a rough time doing that. The other big issue is the side of Cannon Mountain here. This is a state park, a very beautiful state park. There's lots of people who pay attention to the environment in the state park, and the crane works and the other construction equipment that you have to mount at the top would basically destroy the side of Cannon Mountain. So this proposals to put something up there where the old man was, have lots of practical problems and lots of financial problems. Public or private money that would go into a project like that wouldn't represent a really prudent investment, given the situation. Anyway, that brings us to the legacy. The old man was gone. This is some sort of material we've been working on, trying to describe how people saw the old man. And you know, when someone's alive, so the personality's alive, and the old man was on the mountain, nobody really thought about this very much. It affected them, but they didn't think about what they would do when it was gone, or how they would react. And what we're seeing is people saw him as a timeless kind of enduring presence. In fact, the exhibit upstairs is called an enduring presence for that very reason. He was steady, he was rugged, time-worn profile, represented the kind of personality that people saw in New Hampshire residents, or the character of people in New Hampshire, independence of spirit, supportive, and so on and so forth. Some of it was very sublime, almost theological in its nature. I think a lot of people took great comfort in the old man being there. I still do it today. I drive up I-93 through Franconia Notch and I take a look up there. Still do it today. I think there's lots and lots of people who do that. The fact that he's gone is a problem, because the reassuring steadiness and that kind of thing is gone. The Legacy Fund, in cooperation with the museum here, we're working on trying to articulate this a lot better than that, and try to put that together in a way that it can be carried forward. But we had to do something. The old man in the mountain needed to be remembered, and something to wrap this legacy around. And we went through a process that I would hardly encourage you not to go through if you ever have a chance. We decided to run a contest to see who could come up with the best way to memorialize the old man. And let me tell you, in a contest like that, everybody's angry when it's over, except the person whose proposal you picked. And so there's no real winner in the whole thing. But what we decided to do was to, responding to that description I gave you earlier of what the old man meant to people, we decided to take an approach like this one. And for those of you who have been to the monument, probably have experienced it already. It was to provide a place where people could go and reconnect with the old man the way they did. What we saw was everybody had a little different way of connecting with it. Mine was geotechnical, very, math and rock mechanics and all that good stuff. My family is altogether different. They each connect with it in their own way. I think those of you who have families and have probably been up there probably feel the same way. But we decided to go with this, which gave people a chance to go back to Profile Lake, where they used to go to see the old man, and to reconnect with him, if you will, in whatever way they connected. The Old Man Legacy Fund is collecting stories from people. We have almost 1,000 of them at the moment, and they're charming. They're really quite charming. Some of them is quite sad. Some of them are charming. There's poetry, there's all sorts of things that have been motivated by this. And so we decided to take advantage of that rather than to take a theme park approach where we would have some sort of grand exhibit and people would drive by and buy a hat and an ice cream cone and go home. What we found is lots of people come back to this again and again. At our event last week, we had people who had been there 5 or 6 times to reconnect with that experience. Anyway, we took this proposal to the New Hampshire legislature and they thought it was crazy. And this is the paver that I bought. This monument is entirely funded with private money. The state of New Hampshire would have nothing to do with it, just because the issue of what kind of monument should go up there was so contentious. And we went, my predecessor president of the Old Man Legacy Fund, he and I went to the legislature and said, what we'd like you to do, since you won't give us the money to really build it, is would you pass a piece of legislation with $1 attached to it, so we can say that the state of New Hampshire supports the project. No, we can't do that. And so my predecessor opened his wallet and gave him a buck, and they still wouldn't do it. Anyway, so what we did was to get this project going, and we sold pavers like this one. And mine's up there only because you start showing other people's pavers and they get a little jazzed about it. Anyway, we managed to raise $750,000 and built the Profiler Plaza that you'll see when you have a chance to go there. The plaza is the pavers you just saw are on the floor of the plaza. And what you do is you walk around on the plaza and you find footprints in the plaza full floor that say 6 feet or 5'6" or whatever your height is. And when you stand on the footprints, you line your eye up with what's known as a profiler, these things here. And a profiler is this steel rod, and on the left-hand side of it are these steel deformations, which based on your height, will line you up and put the old man back up on the mountain right where he was.
It's such a cool thing to do. I do that, I have no idea.
Yeah, the guy that designed this designs toys from Mattel. And each one of the profilers is different for the height. If you think about it for a minute, if you're a short person, your line of sight is different from a tall person. So each one of the 7 profilers is different. It's tremendously clever design. And he did this all in his drafting table, so to speak, calculated all of the angles and everything, and they really work quite perfectly. Anyway, the Legacy Fund is, as I say, working on this legacy. We've got the monument built now. That's what we were supposed to do originally. Now we're collaborating with the state park, trying to generate activities that revolve around the plaza, like the family event we had. And we're supporting more scientific work up there, like the project you saw with the student from Dartmouth, to try to get a better handle on the geology of the Cannon Cliff. As lots of you know, there's rock climbing all over the place on the Cannon Cliff, and there's safety concerns, which the 3D modeling that he did will go a long way to helping us sort out. There are a lot of other projects in the park. Those of you who hike a lot probably know the trails leading up to the Franconia Ridge are wildly overused these days. So we're working with the Appalachian Mountain Club and some other folks to try to get those trails reconstructed and better designed so that they won't erode so quickly. There's the Old Man of the Mountain Legacy Fund site. This has been a condensation of a lot of information, and if you'd like more information about the geology, for sure, that's where you go. If you want to buy a paver in the plaza, you can go there too. If you want to know a lot about the caretakers and the history of the old man that I couldn't include tonight, I'd encourage you to go there as well.
So you can still buy papers?
Yes. Yeah. Anyways, time for questions and answers if you have any.
Are there any questions from folks here in the room? And for those of you on Zoom, you can go ahead. Well, you've got to stay over here too so they can see you, but I was just coming over to open up the chat. But if we want to start with any questions in here at the museum, and then we can also take them from Zoom.
I have a question, Brian, about the early geologists in the 19th century. I don't know if you read Charles Jackson.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so it was Hitchcock, Charles Hitchcock, who said in 1875, if you don't get up there soon, it's not going to be there. So, clearly, but was he only talking about the forehead ledge, or did he understand the quality of it, the lack of quality of the granite?
I spent time at the Ronald Library at Dartmouth, where he was professor looking for notes of that sort. And we did find the notes of the day he was there, and he did not get underneath. He was on top of it. And but I'm sure he would have.
So he was just basing that on seeing that forehead ledge.
Yeah, at the time, the forehead ledge was sitting there with a crack in it, with nothing over it. There was no turnbuckles, that was 1840, right?
No, that was Jackson.
Oh, Jackson, okay.
It was the 1870s. People never got up here.
Jackson was smart enough not to comment. Yeah,
Was, you think that all that turnbuckle extended the life of it?
Can you summarize the question so that folks on Zoom can
Yeah,
hear?
the question was, were the turnbuckles,
Extend the life of.
yeah, did it extend the life of the profile? Excuse me, I think it extended the top of the forehead slab stayed put, but there was nothing underneath.
Yeah.
And that's where the processes were working to bring it down. So the answer is yeah, in that local part of the profile, but no in the long term.
Barbara, did you?
Yeah, I just was wondering, is it a 5013C that is what the fund?
Yes, yeah,
Oh, it is.
yeah,
It's not state.
no, we're a private nonprofit.
Oh,
And, for those of you who live in New Hampshire, we keep it that way so they can't raid our money.
but the land that your memorial is on.
That's Franconia Notch State Park.
Oh,
And when we got the monument finished, we went through a legal process to give it to the state.
okay, sure.
Yeah, so we have retained the 501c3, we maintain the monument, but the state
Right.
technically owns it.
Yes. What is your target?
Well, we've got the monument constructed and now we're sort of shooting for something in the $250,000 range to set up an endowment to maintain it. And then we're cooperating, as I said, with the park on various projects around Profile Lake, trying to bring the trout population back into its natural breeding characteristics,
Yeah,
which is interesting with an interstate highway running through the middle of it. But we're working on it.
yeah, well,
And trail projects and
must
so.
be able to get some kind of a grant.
Yep, we're looking into that.
Yeah,
And now that we've got the monument finished, we've got time to do that. So we're, in fact, with the cooperation of the museum, we're hoping to do that.
And in terms of a more sort of interpretive center
yeah.
there as well.
Yeah.
That's the part. We're not involved with the trail. Yeah, and
The construction of the road through the notch have any vibrating impact? Did it accelerate what happened?
It doesn't appear as though it did. We were, as I said earlier, we were monitoring all the vibrations that were there all the time during the construction. And we knew exactly when the blasts would go off because they were timed, so we could pick them up on the seismograph. And the worst of those, the strongest of those was within about 3% of the natural vibrations that it was receiving all the time anyway. So we never got close to a vibration that would really have shaken it down. And it stayed up there from 1986 to 2003. So we hadn't done even if we couldn't measure it, we hadn't done anything to it that would have brought it down in an approximate way.
So that was 1976.
Summer, the blasting,
Yeah,
1986.
86.
86, yeah. Yeah, 85 and 86 was the construction.
So I wasn't climbing up there that summer, but I had friends who were, and they said the rock shook whenever there was a blast. So they are human seismographs that seem to
Well,
not jive with your mechanical.
well, the 3D work suggests there's places on the cliff that would vibrate. We didn't know where they were. Maybe the rock climbers did, but there's places on the canyon cliff that are extremely unstable. Yeah.
so there's a couple of questions and comments in the chat. So one person said, I wonder if a possible reason why people found it so disturbing when he fell was that we think rock is something that lasts forever. Like, it gives the example of gravestones and was losing the old man, possibly having to deal with another mortality, that this thing that was supposed to be forever wasn't.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good observation. I really do. And, as a geologist and scientist, I guess I'm not equipped with the right vocabulary to talk about this thing. I wish sometimes I was a funeral director, so I have some sort of background that I could call, I could call forward, but you get the idea. The old man meant a lot of different things to different people. And to my way of thinking, the proof of the pudding is going to the monument and sitting on the sides and watching people. They'll come and they'll connect and depending on what their recollection is or what their connection was with the old man, we've seen people weeping, and we've seen people laughing, and we've seen all kinds of reactions like that. So some of the most remarkable ones, however, come from people who never saw the old man up there. They want to know what it was, and they come and they see it, and the interactive process of having to work a little bit to see the profile connects them in a maybe not the same way, but it certainly connects them with the remarkable nature of the thing. So we're hoping this legacy thing we're working on has got some real legs and will last.
So Jane O'Connor is wondering if you've been watching the rock slides on the other side of the notch, and do you expect to see any larger slides over there this year due to the wet weather?
I'm not the guy to really answer that question, but there's somebody in the audience who is.
I'd like to take a crack at it because it's a great question.
Yeah, do you want to identify yourself for folks on Zoom? So
Retired geology professor at Penn University.
Why don't you come up here?
I'm a colleague, right? But we've been studying debris flows that covered Route 3 back in 1948 and again in 1949. And those are definitely caused by extreme rainfall events. They match up beautifully with the weather records. But the 1997 rockfall that Brian mentioned, there's a big block sitting right in the bike path that came down that one. The old man in 2003, and the recent one that this Jane refers to on the other side of what we call Eagle Cliff. Hound Stump and Eagle Cliff, they all came down in perfectly clear weather.
Yeah.
And last summer, as you know, was pretty dry.
Yeah.
So
go figure.
yeah, I was going to say that. I think the answer to Jay's question is yes, but we don't know why.
Well, there's a difference between debris flows and rock slides.
Right.
So then we have a question. So I have a polished drill stone of the pink granite from Governor Powell era. Do you have any idea about it? No. Do you have any info about it from what drilling? So like when that might have been, or what drilling that might have been?
Governor Powell would probably have gotten a core when they were drilling those holes for the stables. Yeah, because they took some cores out of a lot of them are just percussion drilling, so they're just chips like a jackhammer. But I think there's at least three. I can't honestly remember how many. I think at least three of them were cored, and that's probably where the sample comes from.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
So we have one more question. Approximately how many years was the rock formation that made the old man in the mountain hanging up there? And so you touched on this a little bit, but can you, I mean,
Yeah. Let's see, to answer the question, I guess we're working in the laboratory to find out if we can quantify that chemical weathering process. In other words, how fast it proceeds. Freezing and thawing is very active, and that just depends on the size of the block. So that's why I said, given the fact those blocks had to fall off there just the right way, just the right order and just the right way, so they didn't knock into each other or whatever. My guess is 500 years.
but we won't hold you to that.
Please no.
Yeah.
So I study lichens, or use lichens, I should say, to measure ages of Neoglacian moraines, for example, in Baffin Island. And when we would measure the ribocarbon geographicum, the pistachio green colored lichen, it grows in a circular pattern. We could calibrate that with other radiometric dating, like radiocarbon dating. And we came to the conclusion that if you've got a full cover of isocarbon on a rock surface, it really took about 3,000 years to completely cover the surface. And that's what we have. We still have to this day. In Canada, there's a full lichen cover. And so I would wish Ryan was 500 years back to 2,000 or 3,000.
But is that for the cliff or that formation? I guess I feel like that's the trick, like,
I
yeah.
climbed a lot on that formation that Brian did. And the same rhizocarpine, full cover was all over those surfaces. There's a rock group that's still there, a climbing group just to the left of the old man, the slides. And you can see there's a long sloping ledge. It's like a free, that's because of all the people climbing up that ledge.
Yeah.
But the face, that's still there, is still heavily covered with rhizocarpine. And you get down to the tail slope, no rhizocarpine any longer. The big block that came all the way down to the bike path had rhizocarpine, but rhizocarpine does not do well down at low elevation in the trees. It all decayed away within the last 20, 30 years.
So you've really opened a can of worms here.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to see what the rock weather is.
I mean,
Yeah.
given the stability of the old man, just the rock, blocks of rock making up the old man, given the stability or the lack of it there, I mean, I think it's pretty fragile compared to other places in the cliff. But as Tom pointed out earlier, there are places that are even more delicate than the old man. So this is one of the reasons why the 3D imaging project was so interesting. And he's still crunching data and all that, so we don't have the full results. But that's the kind of scientific research we're still doing. And in generating more arguments, which is great.
Isn't there something about the quarry, they were looking at the concentration of radon?
At the time,
Yeah.
that was over in the Redstone Quarry in Conway.
Okay.
They were looking for geothermal
Yeah, right.
sources there.
Okay, so that didn't happen at all.
No,
No, they're looking for a random waste disposal site, somewhere that keeps, they're taking quarters from all these random bodies all over.
I think
Comic brand, but not.
Well, Cali granite and several other,
Yeah.
but